Hello, what is up everybody, my name is Midway and welcome to this video guide for how to play Holy Paladin Season 3 Mythic Plus of Shadowlands. We're going to be covering everything you need to know about how to play this spec in dungeons. But before we do that, I'm streaming on twitch.tv/MidwayEU as well as on this YouTube channel, so if you're interested in watching me push high keys or also streaming my raids, please drop a follow and subscribe, I would really appreciate it, and now let's just get into the guide. So let's talk a little bit about Venthyr versus Necrolord. Now, we're no longer playing Venthyr, and that's because Ashen got massively nerfed, as well as Wings rank 3 disappearing, and now we have only Rings rank 2, which basically that takes away 10% increased healing and damage done, as well as 10% increased critical strike while having Wings up. Now, that means that the bursty nature of playing Venthyr in Mythic Plus is kind of dead. Like, you can still go ham and pop Ashen and Wings, but it will not do the same as it used to before. It will not do as much damage and it will not do as much healing, therefore almost killing the entire niche of the spec back then. Nowadays we play Necrolord because it kind of makes up a little bit for the healing that we didn't have before. It is of course not gonna be enough as to cover what an Ashen would do during the duration of the Ashen, but since we can get Vanquisher's Hammer charges way more often than we have Ashens, it basically just gives Holy Paladins a much greater range of options when dealing with big AoE scenarios, and we can still have that big spot healing that Paladin has always had. So we kind of have gained a little bit of utility in terms of AoE healing, kind of making us a little bit comp dependent, but it takes away the big burst in nature and it gives us a lot more CDs to play around with. That also plays a lot into having the new tier set, which gives us a lot of Wings uptime, which also makes Necrolord quite strong because it plays really well with our tier set. Now Venthyr, as I said, kind of died out because the niche of big bursty heals and damage is not quite as necessary anymore, because there's other options that are just making that pretty much automatically, as well as we now have Urs, which, you know, the relic, which kind of enables a lot of things as well. So yeah, basically we have all kind of gravitated towards Necrolord because it just plays better, we just have more resources, we feel stronger as healers, and the damage is not that far off nowadays in comparison to what Venthyr is. So now that we've talked a little bit about why we play Necrolord, let's talk about the Soulbinds and the Conduits. The main Soulbind that we are usually playing is Emeni, and Emeni is pretty strong based off of mainly this trait over here, Lead by Example, increases our intellect and our allies trinket quite a bit, and it's pretty much just like the T from Theotar, although it's not as strong, but it's still pretty nice. We're gonna get a decent uptime off it because it procs every time we use Vanquisher's Hammer, which is fairly often. Another offensive option is Pustule Eruption, which will do some AoE damage whenever we consume the Pustule charges that we get from using Fleshcraft. So it can do something of an upwards of like 350k damage throughout the entire dungeon. It's of course going to depend on the dungeon, many other factors, as well as how many times you use Fleshcraft. Some other defensive options are Resilient Stitching. It's gonna give us a pretty strong shield that's gonna be up almost all the time. It makes us really tanky together with Fleshcraft. Also, here we have an increased maximum HP of 5% whenever we use Fleshcraft, also pretty strong. And we get some other minor options here, like this one where we get a little bit of shield when we take falling damage, which we can proc in the other side, so that's okay in that scenario, as well as some increased haste from enemies that we've defeated. The buff doesn't last too long, so it's not that great, and whenever enemies are dying, usually you kind of don't need the buff anymore, but it's still nice to get some extra haste, so that's always good. Now, Conduits doesn't really change too much from previous seasons. Endurance Conduits kind of remain the same. Shielding Wards has always been the best one for Mythic Plus, as well as Golden Path. If your usage of Consecration is strong enough, Golden Path will always outshine Condensed and Hemisphere, and there's nothing else that's a contender for that slot. In terms of potency Conduits, the Vanquisher's Hammer Conduit is a must. It deals an insane amount of damage, it increases the damage that Vanquisher's Hammer will do, as well as makes it do a little bit of a healing effect whenever we actually deal damage with it. So you can use it as a way of leeching out of things whenever you know that the damage is happening. You can time that properly and get that leech effect, otherwise nothing too major, you don't really have to think too much about it. Focus Light will always be a very nice conduit to have, although it's not that strong, but we don't really have that many other options really, so that is usually a staple there. And then for Finesse Conduits, Light's Barding will always be a must. It's making our only movement speed increase basically last more than double, so you basically always want to have that. And then the other Finesse Conduit in these three, we can swap around this with Wrench Evil if you need to use Turn Evil in dungeons, for example, like Necrotic Wake for the second boss to fearing the mages. This is a very strong conduit for that, just makes things a lot more smoother. And if you're playing the first boss in Mists, you can use then the Pure Concentration Conduit to make the fear effect just last way shorter, but you got of course to remember to switch to Concentration in order to make use of it. But otherwise, the default one would always be Echoing Blessings, just for a little bit of an extra movement speed layer in any given scenario can always be very nice. Now when you are playing Plagueful or Theater of Pain, usually you will be playing Marileth. Now Marileth is also pretty strong, it's got some very offensive options like Kevin, and then you get some other stuff, for example like the buffs from Volatile Solvent. It's a pretty nice stream. In this case we are using a Virtuous Command because we have a third potency slot. Virtuous Command will just give us a little bit of extra damage, doesn't do that much but it's pretty nice. Another option, if you don't really want to be using Virtuous Command because you don't think it's worth it, would be to instead use the Vanquisher's Hammer Conduit on this spot and then switching this to using another Finesse Conduit, which you can just, you know, keep Echoing Blessings there and something else, and then make use of this trait here, which gives some increased damage on a single target, which is alright, nothing too crazy, but it's something you can make use of. Usually I wouldn't do that and I would just stay to this. Now here we also get a little bit of a defensive layer with Fleshcraft, which makes us immune to crowd control, so that's pretty nice. However, this is not, I wouldn't say this is as strong, especially in overall AoE scenarios, and many with Pustules and increased intellect I think will always come ahead, but it's got some uses, as I said, on Plagueful and Theater of Pain, usually you will be playing this. Now talking about the talents here, this is what they would usually look like for Mythic Plus. Important things that have changed from Season 2 is the fact that we do not longer need Holy Avenger as much. The reason for playing Holy Avenger was because we were blowing our Ashen and Wings, usually on big packs for the sake of big damage or to enable pulls where there would be a lot of healing to be done. But Ashen was such a long cooldown that we were left naked right after, right? So we kind of relied on Holy Avenger to pick up the slack a little bit. But now that we are playing Necrolord, now that we have the tier set, we have a lot more Wings uptime and we have a lot more AoE healing capabilities. That's a little bit of a comp dependency thing, but we are basically stronger in terms of healing. At least I feel like I'm stronger nowadays. So we do not rely on Holy Avenger to pick up the slack, as I said, and we can just make by naturally with Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose will also feed into the whole loop back or feedback loop of just keep up the Wings uptime, and that way doing more damage and more healing and more Word of Glories and more Lights of Dawn. It just all fits into it, it plays really nicely. However, of course, you can always pick Holy Avenger. There will be scenarios where I'm pretty sure that Holy Avenger will just guarantee that you will always be strong at that point, so you can cover up any weak spot at the expense of maybe some Wings uptime if you just didn't have that good RNG or whatever. Holy Avenger is absolutely playable, but this is what the tree would usually look like. Awakening always a staple, again, playing into the feedback loop of getting procs, getting more Wings uptime. Double Beacon has come and is gonna stay because it just plays so great whenever you have a very weak target, like for example Hunters or Rogues in some scenarios. Just stick the Beacon on them and they are pretty much gonna be completely fine. Beacon of Virtue is really clunky but it's playable, and Glimmer of Light is just not as strong, although it does provide a little bit of extra damage, although the damage that it provides is kinda shit, so not that strong. I think Double Beacon will always outshine the other options. Judgment of Light is a staple, free healing when you use Judgment, and you're pretty much always using Judgment because it's part of your damage. And Light's Hammer is free AoE damage, also pretty strong, so this is what I would always recommend you using as talents, unless you want to switch it up with the Holy Avenger. Otherwise, this is what I will always recommend you using. Now, talk a little bit about legendaries. There's been a new contender for the spot of best in slot legendary for Mythic Plus coming into the season, and that is Vanguard's Momentum. Now, Vanguard's Momentum is being used in the past. However, nowadays the Chinese players that are right now in the top of the ladder on Red.io, they are running Vanguard's Momentum. The reason for that is, I do not know, honestly. I think Matt Paragon and Vanguard's Momentum are pretty much even. They have different strengths, but they almost break even when it comes to overall damage done. Now, Matt Paragon will give you the extra uptime on Wings, of course, and more damage from Hammer of Wrath, but Vanguard's Momentum will give you a little bit of extra holy damage done, as well as having a second charge of Hammer of Wrath, which, to be honest, the second charge of Hammer of Wrath is not really that useful unless you're talking about like an explosive wick, but other than that, the extra holy damage done will kind of be offset by the fact that your Wings uptime will be a little bit lesser, because of the fact that you're not extending those wings with the Hammers of Wrath, as well as the fact that your Hammer of Wrath is doing less damage. Also, when you're playing Mad Paragon, you have more uptime on wings, meaning you have more usages of Hammer of Wrath. So I think it kind of breaks even. I'm not sure why they are using Vanguard's momentum. I think they're so similar. I've run a test where I did the exact same DPS on a single target boss fight on the same key, back to back, one level lower, because we depleted a little bit after, so I switched legendaries and I did exactly 5k in both scenarios. Now when it comes to AoE, it's gonna depend on many factors and also RNG, because Holy Paladin is really RNG when it comes especially to wings uptime, so it's kind of hard to make a fair comparison, and honestly I haven't really had a chance where I can make such a comparison, but I just think that it's kind of whatever, it kind of breaks even, and really it should just come down to what gear, like what's your best gear at the moment. If you like using Vanguard's momentum, it's gonna make you use a worse item in another slot, you probably shouldn't, because it's not that big of a deal. Now back on the topic of gear, I'm gonna give you guys the tip of what's the absolute best in slot that I think you should be aiming for in this season if you want to get all the perfect items for the perfect stats for Holy Paladin, just as a way to having like an objective or something to look forward to. I'm just gonna give you that. So when it comes to trinkets, Soul Lias is very strong now, as well as Changeling. Changeling is still the best healing trinket for both Raiding and Mythic Plus. However, Soul Lias is just very consistent, and it can also buff your allies as well as make up for individual stats that you might want to choose. For example, if you're lacking a little bit of haste, you can pick up a little bit more haste. If you want a little bit more burst, you can do that. It's very versatile. Changeling, however, it is overall gonna give you more stats, taking into account the uptime that it has throughout the dungeon. That's about like that 25% sort of. So you can make the math based, look at your uptime on the buff from Changeling, and then make the math, divide that by the uptime based on the absolute total amount of stats you get from it, and then you can see which is gonna give you more. But I would advise you to play with Soul Lias, because you cannot play with both if you want to be running the absolute best in slot, and that is because the absolute best in slot has to be using the trinket from Sausage, which is Resonant Reservoir, which is just basically a lot of free damage. I'm pretty sure you've seen every healer run this if they can get it. However, as Holy Paladins, we cannot loot this trinket no matter what. We need a friend or somebody to trade it to us. So that's that. If you can get your hands on this trinket, I haven't got it myself. It's just a lot of free damage. You can play around with it. It's got a little bit of a funky way of working. You can look into it. I don't have it, so I cannot show you. But it is pretty strong, it's really simple to use, and it's also pretty fun because big numbers are always fun. Now, moving from trinkets, let's talk about accessories. The new dungeon, Tassavesh Gambit, has a new set of rings, or a new set of a ring and a necklace, which both have haste and versatility as main stats. Personally, I think this ring is the best slot ring. In this case, I got pretty lucky, and I got it traded to me with a leech and a socket already, so absolutely nuts. I think this is best slot. As well as I said, the neck also has haste and burst, same stats as the PvP option. However, the PvP option will have more versatility. However, you need to PvP for it, and I cannot be arsed to PvP. So if you do not want to PvP like I do, you can go ahead and use this one. It's gonna be 272 no matter what. If you get it from the vault, perfect, but otherwise it will be the same item level as if you got it from PvP, because it will not go up unless you're doing PvP to 278. So that's that. This, I think it's the best slot neck. When it comes to tier set, the helmet's got best in slot stats, so you can get that. Now let's assume you have access to 285 gear from the raid. The best in slot would be the shoulders and the chest at 285. There is a cloak at 285 which you can catalyst then into this version of the cloak that has haste and versatility, so that's your best in slot, sorry. The wrists, the first boss from the raid drops some wrists with haste and versatility. So you want to be getting that one. It is also best in slot right there. The weapon, there is a weapon from Sanguine Depths, the one that I have. It's the weapon with the most amount of useful stats for raiding. Not raiding, sorry, Mythic Plus, and that is because it just gives a lot of burst. Pretty nice, pretty good value, even though it's got some mastery. The shield with haste and versatility from the first boss as well. Not the first boss, sorry, I think it's from Skolex, yeah, Skolex. Best in slot. Even though there is a higher item level shield, I don't think the higher item level will make up for the bad stats that you have here. haste and mastery is not bad stats, but losing that much versatility, I don't think it is worth it at all. Now another one, in this case, talking about hands. The hands from Rygalon are best in slot stats as well as higher item level. So if you are playing Vanguard's Momentum, what you can do is you can run 285 hands from Rygalon, and then instead of running the Unity on the pants, like I am doing right here, you can run Unity on the belt. Sorry, I gotta take that off first. And then you can run Tier Set on the legs, which you can also catalyst all the way up to 285 by using the pants that drop from the Jailer. If you have access to those, you can catalyst those, of course, to the Tier Set version, and that will give you the extra item level, as well as enabling you to use those hands from Rygalon and still keeping the 4 set. And the boots then would be Vanguard's Momentum, and that would pretty much be it. That would be the guideline that I would give you to what you should be looking for in terms of gearing for this season for Holy Paladin. Now, if you're playing Mad Paragon instead, for whatever reason, you can switch away. Mad Paragon would have to go on the belt, so you would have to switch away the boots, use Mad Paragon on the belt, and then use Unity on the legs. There is, if you catalyst the boots, you can get a haste burst set of boots as well, so you should, in this case, you do that. It would just give you very good stats, basically. Now let's touch a little bit on how you play Necrolord in dungeons. Necrolord plays really smoothly, and the reason for that is because you do not have to think so much about when you want to be using your cooldowns. The fact is, with the tier set right now, and also playing Divine Purpose instead of Holy Avenger, we have an insane uptime of wings throughout the entire dungeon. Usually would be something like 70%. It's really high, it's almost always up, and whenever you need it, it should be up, basically, because your wings can just be reduced. Their CD is reduced at will by abusing the 4 set. Now, if you didn't know, our 2 set, basically, after we cast a Word of Glory, will make it so that the next Light of Dawn does a double Light of Dawn, so it's just going to be cast twice. And any Light of Dawn we use has a 50% chance to reduce the cooldown of wings by 2 seconds per target hit. So we can keep generating holy power and keep spending it on Light of Dawn and trying to hit as many people just to reduce the cooldown of wings. Now you say, wait, if we're spamming Light of Dawn, we're not using Shield of the Righteous, therefore we are doing less damage. Yeah, but you are making up for it in the fact that you have more wings, therefore buffing your consecration damage, enabling you to use Hammer of Wrath, and just straight up buffing all your healing and all your damage. Now there are scenarios where if there's a massive pack or you already have wings up coming up, you have the buff up and wings up coming up, then why would you Light of Dawn, right? So then you would be using Shield of the Righteous. But if there's a massive pack and the value of Shield of the Righteous, you just feel like it's massive and you feel like you should use it, then go ahead and use it. I don't really have a number of targets when it's not worth to use one thing and then use the other, because the nature of the spec is RNG. If you get a lot of CDR, it's going to be worth it. If you do not, you might just be wasting your holy power by using the procs, right? So it all comes down to RNG, but I would just take it a rule of thumb. If there's a lot of mobs and you have wings up and wings coming up, go ahead and use some Shield of the Righteous. Otherwise, throw some Lights of Dawn. Even if everybody stopped, just get used to throwing them. It feels really nice, makes everything flow smoothly. You don't have to worry so much about your cooldown uptime because it's pretty much always up. Now, what about Vanquisher's Hammer? When do you want to use it? When do you want to keep the charges? The reality is Vanquisher's Hammer is a very short cooldown. Only 30 seconds means it's almost always going to be up. And it's also reduced by, the cooldown is also reduced by using the buff, right? So you can almost pretty much have one up or coming up just about soon enough that you feel safe. I've rarely encountered scenarios where I feel like an absolute panic, where I do not have anything coming up. And if you foresee that that's going to happen, then you can always save up 2 charges. However, my advice would be to always keep at least 1 charge on CD, because you just want to be making as much of a use of Vanquisher's Hammer, because that is the bread and bones of the way the spec plays, by using the charges of Vanquisher's Hammer, consuming them, and therefore proccing Awakening, proccing Divine Purpose, reducing the cooldown of Wings, and just all fitting into that cycle of getting more Wings uptime, therefore having more healing, therefore doing more damage. Keeping one charge ready just means that you will be ready for any sort of emergency scenario. However, as I said, it's a very short cooldown, so just using both and not having any, it's not a problem. You will always almost have one charge coming up real soon, so you don't have to panic in any scenario. One thing that I find myself always thinking about is, when should I use the charges? If like I do not need the healing, I already have Wings, like should I spend the GCD using a Word of Glory so then I can proc my my buff from Vanquisher's Hammer, getting the extra Light of Dawn? It's a hard question because sometimes one GCD, just like it seems that you have so many things to use that you are just overflowing. And if you already have Wings, you have a lot of Wings, you have Wings coming up, you know it, you are tracking both the buff and the cooldown of it. It just doesn't seem worth it. There's times where I just don't use it. Otherwise, I try to make a use of it because at the end of the day, it is free healing and it's just proccing everything, as I already stated. So I would usually try, even though I do not need the healing, to consume the charges of the Vanquisher's Hammer buff. Also, try to always use Vanquisher's Hammer together with Wings. That's pretty obvious, but the damage from Vanquisher's Hammer is pretty high. It's not going to be your main damage because that will be Consecration if you play right. However, I think it's pretty easy to just, if you can do it, save up a charge and just wait until you have Wings, because you will probably have Wings in like 2 seconds because they're always up. So just try and do that, just a way of boosting your damage quite considerably. Otherwise, just use your stuff. It's really intuitive. It just flows nicely. It kind of feels like you have a lot of things to press. And I really like the way this plays in comparison to how Venthyr played. Where it just felt like you were drowning and you were just like chasing the cooldowns because they were always on CD, just the Ashen and the Wings. Fleshcraft is a pretty good defensive tool. You should not forget that it exists. Try to keep it on CD unless you need it for something. If you are running, well, anyways, Fleshcraft, whenever you use it, it won't only give you the shield. It will also give you a 20% defensive buff while you're using it. So it will play pretty nicely together with under any other scenario where like you're gonna take a lot of damage. Just keep in mind that Fleshcraft, it's not only valuable for the shield, it's also valuable for the 20% damage reduction it gives you while channeling. So keep that in mind, use it as another layer of personal. It can make you very tanky, and Fleshcraft together with the many Soulbind and some other traits, you just get so many shields, you are basically unkillable. However, versus big tyrannical bosses, you will still have to play around it very smartly, because you do not have that many big, almost immunity things. You have Bubble, of course, have Bob, but you are kind of squishy when it gets to very high-end scenarios. Not as squishy as, for example, a Shaman or a Priest. Then that gives us a big plus versus these now meta classes. But still, think about it smartly. Try to stagger your stuff. Remember, of course, to use Divine Protection, which you can already use while stunned. So kind of prioritize to use Fleshcraft if you are going to be doing it for the 20% DR. Otherwise, keep it on CD because it's extra damage just from the Fuse tools alone if you're using a many. So I think that's all I have for you guys. I think that's all the tips that I could come up with right now. If you have any specific questions, please drop a comment. I'll be gladly replying to you. As well as if you feel like watching me live on Twitch and watch how I push some keys or raid, do so, please drop a follow and subscribe. I'll also answer any questions you have on the stream. And yeah, that's all for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the guide. I hope you find it useful. I hope it was not too long. I hope you bear with me. I'm sorry. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about, and sometimes I just cannot condense the information. I hope you enjoyed the format as well. And yep, I hope to see you on another video down the line. Anyways, I appreciate it. I hope you get some Raid IO score, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye bye.